Delighted to welcome everyone today for this UK visa training session, kindly supported by our colleagues at the University of Brighton, and specifically Greg Weinbaum, international student at the University of Brighton, who I will hand over to in a second. But yeah, we're really delighted to be working with the University of Brighton. It's a fantastic university down in the southeast of England, in the very desirable location of Brighton, and just about an hour from London. A fantastic range of courses available. So really one of those universities that offers courses right across the subject mix. So especially those courses popular with international students, including business, engineering, computing, creative arts, education, health, really all of those kind of key subjects that we see international applications for. So really exciting destination, really strong reputation for graduate employability. So it's a university very much focused on preparing students for the world of work. And we're going to hear a lot more about the University of Brighton in a couple of weeks' time when we do their official launch session, but that's not the focus of the session today. We're going to be learning about UK visas, the student route and the graduate route visas from Greg. The visa system in the UK is one of the things I think making the UK an incredibly popular destination at the moment. So the UK has actually quite an efficient system for visa processing. So there are many parts of the world where visas can be processed in as little as 2 weeks using the fast track service, if that's available in the home country. So it's an efficient system. It's pretty pragmatic and clear how to use the system, but we're obviously going to get a lot more insight on that today. But the thing that's really driving demand at the moment, I think, is that graduate route visa that Greg will tell us more about, but allows students to have that 2 years of work experience after they complete their studies, or I think Greg will go through the detail, but 3 years, I believe, for PhD graduates. So yeah, fantastic system. We're going to hear a lot about it. I'm going to hand over to Greg in just a second, but just a reminder for everyone that's just joined, please keep your microphones on mute throughout the session. Type any questions you've got into the chat box, and we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A at the end, and I'll help Greg to work through any questions that we receive as we go through the session. Great. So Greg, if you're ready, I will hand over to you now. I think you've got some slides to share, so feel free to
sure, will do
whenever you're ready. Thanks, Greg.
Okay. Right. Hopefully everyone can now see the PDF, the presentation. I'll just enlarge that, and then we can make a start. So good morning and good afternoon, good evening to some of you. My name is Greg Weinbaum. I'm one of the international student advisors at the university. Myself and my colleagues work in the student advice service. So we're responsible for all aspects of the advising students, international students, on their visa applications, the visa requirements, and so we give the advice on all aspects of coming to the UK, and also applications to remain in the UK during a course if required, as well as applying for the graduate route at the end of it. So bear with me and we shall start. So what I'm going to do, so from what I understand, some of you are experienced in this area and have a good knowledge already, whereas some of you don't have much knowledge at all. So that can be quite difficult to obviously give information that's relevant to all of you. So what I've done essentially is to go for a kind of middle ground where hopefully all of you will have will take something away from it. and hopefully if you have lots of experience, it won't be everything that you know already. And for those of you who this is new, it won't be too complex. So what I'm going to do is run through the presentation, and then I'm going to allow plenty of time for questions, because I think that's the best way forward to solidify what we've covered, and answer queries, of course. So we're going to start with some background, just to look at some of the terminology that's changed, some of the rule changes, and then we're going to move on to the student route and focus mainly on that, followed by covering the graduate route, and then finally what advice and how applicants and students can access advice from myself and my colleagues. Okay, Okay, so the background to this, as some of you will know, in 2020, so at the end of 2020, we moved from the previous was the tier 4 of the points-based system. So we had that for over 10 years. So if you've been working in your roles for some time, you would have known tier 4 covered students coming to the UK. And that took over from what was called the old student route that was in place for many years. However, the Home Office ended the points-based system at the end of 2020, really as part of the post-Brexit immigration system. So now we deal with the student route, and that covers the degree level students that we deal with mainly. So we shall come on to, that's what we're going to look at. So following that, there were some amendments made shortly after that, which I will cover. And then obviously to note that if any of you are working in Europe, then of course EU nationals, EEA nationals came into immigration, the immigration routes at on the 1st of January 21, following Brexit. So EU nationals now part of these routes. So looking at post-study, essentially, some of you will remember post-study work visa. That was part of tier 1. So that was some of the work routes under the points-based system, and that was around, well, up to 10 years ago. It finished. So that was around for just under 4 years. And again, that allowed graduates to work in the UK following their course, and without obtaining a full-time graduate type job. So they could work and look for jobs while they did that. And the graduate route came in last summer, as you'll be aware, I'm sure. And essentially, it's not exactly the same as post-study work, but it is very, very similar. However, we will come to that in more detail later. It's much easier to apply for than post-study work. So similar, but much easier to apply. Some of you would have dealt with students who actually qualified for what was tier 2 under the points-based system, and that's now skilled work route. Now more students are qualifying for that route. So rather than having to apply for the graduate route, they are meeting the necessary salary and job skill requirements for the skilled work route, which is great. And the reason for that is, again, due to Brexit, the Home Office has made that route more accessible to students and non-students when they finish their course. Obviously, they want to make that available to EEA and non-EEA nationals to work in the UK. Now, we've had for some time a startup route that replaced Tier 1 graduate entrepreneur. And the startup route is still in place, which is great because it caters to students who are entrepreneurial. So rather than wanting to work for an employer and taking the graduate route, if they take the startup route, they can develop their business so that they have essentially they have a business plan which is feasible and has the necessary prospects to become successful, so they can go down that route. So that's good, caters to entrepreneurs. So yeah, that's the framework we're dealing with, really, essentially. I should have mentioned that today we're primarily looking at degree level students. We're not dealing with short-term students, i.e. students coming to learn English for over 6 months. And we're not covering students who are coming for a short period of study under the visit rules. So this is essentially this presentation is based on degree level students and rather than any other kind of student. And my focus is obviously students coming to the University of Brighton. So whereas the immigration rules covers all students, some of the procedures I'm talking about relate to ourselves. So how we make offers, how we administer CASs, how we advise students. Okay, so this presentation, although it looks at the rules, it's not necessarily transferable to other institutions. Okay, so I think it's useful to look at terminology because it's much easier when we communicate with, so when staff and agents communicate with each other, it's much easier if we all use the same terminology. Otherwise, we can misunderstandings can occur. I'll give you a good example of the current one that happens now. You may be aware that EU nationals who lived in the UK before the end of 2020 could apply to stay in the UK. So that they were, despite Brexit, the UK government gave several million EU nationals that were living here already the opportunity to remain here. Now that was called the EU settlement scheme. And if you were most people, nearly everyone was successful. If you were successful, you're granted pre-settled status or settled status. Now, as some of you know, someone who applies here, so a non-EU national previous to this point, if you apply to settle here, to live here permanently, if you've, for example, been living here for a long time working, you're granted settlement, indefinite leave to remain. Now, it's still taking a while. People are confusing indefinite leave, i.e. settlement, with settled status. They're similar, but they're entirely different if you're looking at certain immigration and fee regulations. So that's just an example. Now, as we know, Tier 4 became student, so some students still have Tier 4 visas, of course, that if they were granted before the new rules came in. So there's plenty of students with a Tier 4 visa that, let's say, was granted in 2019. However, eventually everyone will have a student visa. Now, the Home Office used to use what was a very complicated terminology because essentially it used the word leave to mean permission, whereas most people know leave to mean leave, as in, depart. So I think it's a good thing that they've got rid of that now. So instead of permission to enter, i.e. leave to enter, it's now permission. So substituting leave, immigration leave, as in to just permission to enter. Still taking a while to get used to that, but I think it's much better for certainly applicants to understand. So entry clearance, as you will be aware, still refers to someone applying overseas for a visa. So student visas, although you're granted student permission to enter, it's in the form of an entry clearance. So in the same way, leave to remain, which we know as a permission to be in the UK or an extension to be in the UK, is now permission to stay. So I think they're good. Maintenance, we used to know as, you had to maintain yourself. That was always a phrase in the immigration rules for decades, essentially. So what that meant was you had some money to accommodate yourself and to have accommodation and to live, essentially, living costs. So now you'll hear the finance requirement for student route applications. Now, in theory, the student route is we still have a points-based system. However, it's actually it's meaningless really now. Even the Home Office don't mention points that much in their correspondence, but they did want to keep the name points-based system. And we knew under Tier 4 that was certainly it was very much central to the requirements. You had to add up the points. That's almost gone now. I mean, you need 40 points you need 70 points for student route. However, it's very it's a moot point really. It's all about, as we shall see in the requirements, it's about your offer and your finances. They also at this time extended the definition of partner, again a good thing. And in terms of sponsors, i.e. let's just focus on universities. So since Tier 4, we've been an immigration sponsor. Again, there's some applicants confuse an immigration sponsor such as an HEI or an employer, and they confuse that with a financial sponsor such as a government or the British government or an international organisation. So we're essentially immigration sponsors. We sponsor students to come to the UK using a visa. Now, some of you may remember HTS, highly trusted sponsor. So the Home Office rank essentially immigration sponsors according to their according to how well they have managed their compliance duties. So we used to have the highly trusted sponsor status. They then changed that to student sponsor. And now what you will see is the rather long way of describing a sponsor who is ranked the highest in terms of compliance. And of course, we have that, we are in that category. So HEI with a track record of compliance. Important because I'm not going into so much detail today, it would be impossible, but what you will realize is if you then look through the immigration rules, if you come to study with an HEI with a track record, you have much more benefits in terms of your study conditions and eligibility for graduate route. So worth bearing in mind, the Home Office have not been doing a lot in terms of sponsor management due to the pandemic. So they used to visit institutions regularly to audit them. They didn't do that due to COVID. However, they will be starting up those. So you may see some changes, but they're usually few and far between in the HE sector, but worth bearing in mind. Okay, so let's have a look at student route. The basics really, the basics before the actual core requirements. So every summer students do ask, where can I apply? Usually because they're either on holiday or they're visiting relatives. So it's a good question. And some students, are already in Europe. doing voluntary work, etc. Now, the definition really is in the rules. You have to apply where you're living, and that means that is literally, essentially you can't apply if you're on holiday or visiting your relative for a short period. So if you're not in your country of nationality where you normally live, it's limited. You usually have to return to that country unless you're in a country on a long-term basis. So, for example, if you're a student elsewhere in a third country, you'll have a long-term student visa, that's fine. You can apply there. Okay, and again, you can see the Home Office lists a long list of every country in the world. I mean, this is a minor point. You'll see that some countries, usually very small ones or small island states, not possible to apply there. You have to travel to another country essentially. But I think in the major markets, that's not an issue. So, but something to be aware of. Now, timing. So the Home Office made it much more generous in terms of applying when you can apply outside the UK. So it used to be 3 months. So you usually couldn't apply until the earliest you could apply would be the end of June, essentially. Now they made that much more generous. How, in reality, I'm not sure how helpful it is. But if someone's in a position to apply early, then they must absolutely be encouraged to do so. The reason the Home Office did this, I think, was, yes, they said, oh, it'll be helpful for students who are in a position before what was the old 3-month requirement. But really, this is about their own this is about their own workload. They have a really high workload in the summer months, so July, August, September, with essentially student applications. So they're just trying to manage their own workload by spreading those out a bit more. I'll come to timing later. So in the UK, it's not so much of an issue, but you can't apply more than the 3 months. Again, in the UK, just to note, I mean, this presentation is largely about applying overseas. I didn't want to go into detail about in the UK applications because you're not going to come across them so much. But I think worth noting, not everyone can apply in the UK if they are already in the UK. So one of those reasons is the gap. Yeah, but the Home Office, they want people to apply in their home countries if they have a large gap between the two courses. Okay, so that's all about applying early. However, of course, and we see this, every year, unfortunately, students, they apply too late, which is a problem, and I'll cover that. And some, unfortunately, apply too early. So it's great to apply early, but not before you meet the requirements. That trumps any. That obviously takes precedence over any other consideration. The Home Office won't hold on to an application until you meet the rules. That's certainly not the case. Okay, very important point. Again, students generally don't know this essentially, and it's fair enough. But the immigration rules say that an application is made. Date of application, of course, is important, very important, because the whole finance requirement is based on the date of application, going back 28 days that we'll cover for self-funding students. So the date of the application is when you submit the online application and pay both fees. So that's the application fee and the immigration health surcharge. So until all those 3 things are done, you haven't applied. Once you do all those 3 things, that is the date of your application. regardless of when you can do your biometrics. I mean, that can be several days or in busy periods, a week or so after your application. So that, they're just the basics, but incredibly important, sometimes overlooked. So I just wanted to include validity requirements. They've not really been an issue, but it's just for completeness. They're more of an issue in terms of applying in the UK, but the Home Office did bring them into the student route rules. Previously, they were in the general rules, but they wanted to focus more on them. Essentially, again, I think workload. They didn't want to have to deal with applications that weren't complete. Now, what they can do is they can, if you, the top three things obviously are essentially you will do them no matter what. You can't apply without completing the application form. If you complete the correct one, that is. If you don't, for example, if you apply for a child student visa and you're not, you're coming to do a degree, unfortunately, they'll just reject that application, and that can waste a couple of weeks of your time, which can be crucial. You must provide your biometrics, and you must use a CAS number that's issued before you apply. So, a lot of those are automatic, but if you don't do your biometrics, you're not making an application, essentially. You've paid the fees, but until you do so, it's not a valid application. The only real area where in reality this could be an issue is if you're funded by your government or international organisation. If you can't provide their consent to your application with your documents, again, that's not a valid application. So yeah, as I say, that is quite niche, but again, it's you need to be aware of it, certainly. Okay, so the core requirements. Now, it's clear that the student route is quite. What I'm trying to say is the student route visa is actually relatively quite easy to apply for and obtain. And the reason I say that is because the requirements are very, they're very explicit. That you either have an offer and a CAS, and you either have the money or you don't. Now, if you compare that to some other visas, if you look at a visit visa requirements, the requirements are the Home Office can make subjective decisions on whether you have the money or not to come to visit, or as a family member, or whether you intend to leave the UK at the end of your visit, for example, or if you're in a subsisting relationship, etc. So that's what I mean by the student route is an easy visa to obtain, because the requirements are there, that you either meet them or you don't. So the main problems come from students not being familiar with what those requirements are. And that, of course, is the finance requirement, or they misinterpret them, or they don't meet the third requirement, which is it's not in the immigration rules, but it's what I think is just as important as the academic and the finance requirements, and that is timing. So it's not in the rules, it's not in immigration rules, but as we'll see shortly, for me, it's probably the biggest hurdle that students face, and they have problems with timing. So we'll come to that. Now, our CAS procedures, you're made an unconditional offer. The university admissions and compliance team, because we're an HEI with a track record of compliance, we can assess the student's English language, which saves them from necessarily having to take a test, depending on their circumstances. Some students will do if they can't meet our language requirements in a different way, but yeah, it's much more straightforward. We do all the assessment. So, you know, that's what this system, student route system, is about. The Home Office have outsourced a lot of the checks they used to do to immigration sponsors. So we do all those checks for the student, and if they're all fine and meet the requirements, we will then issue the CAS. Yes. So we do, for self-funding students, we do require a deposit, and that's £3,000. So we do the checks, and then on receipt of the deposit, we'll issue the CAS. And that deposit, of course, goes towards the tuition fees. So if your tuition is £13,000, you pay the deposit, and then when you come to the university, you obviously are your outstanding fees are £10,000. I won't go into detail about English language because, as I say, we check those. The Home Office did make a really useful addition to English language requirements that saves everyone lots of time and work. So if you've already met the English requirement for the visa, so we're talking B2, SEFRA B2 for a degree. So if you've already met that, let's say you did your undergraduate and you were assessed as B2, or you've got a CELT at B2, and you're now applying for a master's, you don't need to do anything about English language. It's literally signed off on the CAS that you've met the English requirement previously. So that's great, and that's helping students with skilled work applications as well. So I'm sure everyone's familiar with the finance requirement. In theory, as I say, I think it is quite simple and useful. However, things do go wrong. So let's have a look at what's required, and then some of the areas where, you know, students do encounter problems. So December 2020, when the Home Office amended the student rules slightly, they made a small increase, you know, very small increase to the monthly requirement. And for us, students coming to us in Brighton, it's £1,023 per month. You know, quite a lot more in London, for universities in London. So for a degree student, studying a course of more than 9 months or more, sorry. So absolutely, you know, all degrees, postgrads. The figure is 9,207 for living costs, okay? So the formula is quite simple. You add outstanding tuition fees to that figure, and that's the magic number, essentially. You know, as I say, you take off, everyone's paid the deposit. If they're a self-funding student, everyone's paid the deposit. So it's outstanding tuition fees, so it'll be less than the actual tuition. So in this example, you can see it's 12,000, which we add to the maintenance requirement. Some students pay more in advance. They don't have to get the visa. Again, that's a kind of you know, it's a misunderstanding that the more you pay before you apply for the visa, the more chance you have of obtaining it. That's not at all the case. It's about whether you have the money. So regardless if you've paid all your tuition in advance, they're assessed in the same way. I mean, if anything, the Home Office possibly view large payment of fees in a, you know, the converse way that you may think, but I won't go into that. So it's about paying the deposit as far as we're concerned for the CAS, and then there's a further payment required at enrolment. Okay, so let's look at how you show the money. Now, the easiest way is if your government pays, or the British government pays, or the UN or an organisation, because of course you don't need to then provide any evidence of your finances or your parents' finances. So by official financial sponsorship, we mean, and the Home Office means, your sponsor, your government, pays everything. So all of your tuition and all your living costs, which by that the Home Office means at least 9,207 for the year. So that's the easiest way. The definition of official financial sponsor also includes international company. Yeah, that's rare, and usually causes problems, because how international company is defined, well, it means a multinational, essentially, operating in more than one country. So yeah, it's not straightforward, but it is included. But I think someone sponsored by their company does need advice, proper immigration advice, because sometimes the Home Office questions why a company would pay for a fairly junior member of staff to study in the UK at this cost. But anyway, as I say, that's not really what we're looking at today. So the easiest way for a self-funding student to show the money is to provide a current or fixed deposit or saving account. So essentially the most common ways to hold cash funds in a bank, and the money has to be accessible immediately. So there can't be any notice period, regardless of how many funds there are. And that can be in a parent's name as well, which is of course common for younger undergrads. Usually the money's in their parent's name. Loans, again, the Home Office, yeah, so that with the student route, they have given more detail about loans. Now, some countries have loans from their government. So rather than the government paying for all of your tuition and living costs, they will give you a loan. So, for example, in the USA, there's a few essentially student loan companies working on behalf of the government, who are lending the money for the studies. I think the one that gives more problems that we saw last summer, so student route, is a private loan from an financial institution, so a bank, because the stipulation in the rules and the guidance is that it must be an educational academic loan scheme, and often what we've found is it's quite difficult to know whether it is actually an official academic or educational loan scheme. So so it needs to be clearer. I think that this will be the second summer under student route, but yeah, there were problems we found with the banks. It wasn't very clear whether they were official loan schemes. So we couldn't really advise on that matter, because all we could say, it has to be an official academic loan scheme, but the evidence they were obtaining from the bank didn't suggest it was. So a bit of a grey area, just to be, hopefully it will be improved this year. Now, in terms of, we're going to look at timing. Of course, self-funded students, they must hold the money for 28 days before the application, and this is what can cause problems, because we have, of course, the deadline of the course starting, and in some cases the 28 days doesn't start in time for that. So before we look at timing, we do see problems with these funds that are relied on, and the Home Office don't accept them. So under any circumstances, business accounts, they won't take those funds into account. So we do see statements that are very have very healthy balances, way in excess of that what's required for a student route visa. And often the parent will say, it's, is my business exclusively, I'm the only director, so no one is, the funds are purely mine. But unfortunately, it's just historical that the Home Office won't accept them. And again, no matter how much money you have in fixed instruments, financial accounts, shares, bonds, credit cards, etc., even if they're accessible straight away, they don't accept those. So again, we see investment accounts with very healthy sums, way more than that's required under the rules, but that they're of no use whatsoever in terms of getting your student visa. They're essentially zero, when £0 in for the visa. We do also see, which we do understand, students rely on funds held in a relative's name, so uncles, aunties, grandparents. Again, no matter how much is in that account, it doesn't count towards the visa at all. Okay. Now, rather unfortunately, the Home Office again don't accept, no matter how much you've paid, if you've gone outside of the halls of residence and paid rent up front, then they won't consider that. So even if you've paid the whole year, maybe £5,000-6,000, that can't go towards reducing the amount of money you need to show, I'm afraid. So that can cause problems if the student is then left with an amount less than what's required. So they then have to top up what they have. Now you can't, there's no waiver of the maintenance requirement if you're living with a UK-based relative, for example, or friend. Yeah, unfortunately, that you still have to show the 9,000 figure for maintenance, even if you're not going to spend a penny, if you're going to be fully looked after. Now, funds, yeah, so this is an interesting point. So I think we're a bit pressed for time, so I won't go into, I was going to look at the rules with you. Now, the Home Office, if you dealt with Tier 4, you will have remembered there was an appendix in the immigration rules that provided a list of essentially banks that it deemed acceptable and that it deemed unacceptable. And it never got around to doing that in all countries. It only did it for several countries. That went when Student Route came in, and now there's a much more vaguer situation where they say, no matter how many funds you have in a bank, if we don't deem it to be acceptable, those funds will not be considered. Now, what do they mean by unacceptable? What they're saying is, if we can't communicate with the institution and what they call a verification checks, so if the Home Office make a request to the bank and that request is not cooperated with, that's when they start saying this institution's not acceptable. And they also say, if the bank isn't using electronic means of bank, so statements, etc., again, that they're not willing to meet their definition. I unfortunately don't have time with that, but you can find that in the student route immigration rules, in the finance requirement rules as well. So you can take a look at that. We've not come across anyone who's had a problem with that. So right, I'm conscious of time. Sorry, can I just? Sorry, I can't see my clock. So if I think. And I'm not sure about the clock is correct.
Greg, we've got about 15 minutes left.
Okay. So I'm gonna gloss through some of these because I do want to take questions. You're going to have a copy of this presentation and it's been recorded. So I don't want to look at the process. It's very self-explanatory. I mean, the main point is they just put the student route application up very slightly by £15. That was done last week. But yeah, I shall leave that. I'm sure you're aware of that. And the highlights about documents are basically quite a bit of confusion last summer. But if you're coming to the university, if you're coming to Brighton and other HEIs with track record, compliance status, you don't need to provide your academic transcripts or degree certificates that are on your CAS. So that's useful. I shall leave, again, that's all very self-explanatory. Of course, documents need to be translated if they're not in English already. Again, that's been around for a while. So, and again, this is the procedure. Non-EEA nationals, of course, as you will know, have to book an appointment at the Visa Application Centre, the VAC. Problem in the summer is that wait between booking the appointment and the actual date of the appointment does creep up to be fairly considerable. It needs to be considered when applying. As Gareth said, the Home Office are very, efficient at deciding the application, but that process is only, as far as they're concerned, it's only once you've done your biometrics. So their processing times, they don't take into account how long the VAC is taking to see you for biometrics. I think there's good news on the horizon, however, because the EEA nationals can use an app at the moment to do their biometrics, and I believe that will be rolled out. The plan is to roll that out globally. That will be great. That will be so much better. So essentially, as soon as you apply, as soon as you've paid and submitted your application, you'll be able to go to the app and do your biometrics. And then it's, then you just wait for the application to be considered. So, and then, once the Home Office has made their decision, so that's someone in the UK now, it's very rare that they make decisions, they're based overseas. So Home Office caseworker says they grant the application, they enter that into their system. And again, there's another wait then for that. Those decisions are sent electronically to the visa application centres. In the summer, again, there's lots. There's a lot of grants on any one day. There'll be possibly hundreds, and then the visa application centres then need to put the entry clearance vignette into the passport. So, as I say, it's the whole process. There are those. The actual decision is in the middle of a sandwich of waiting for a biometric appointment and then waiting for the VAC to put the vignette into your passport. So it's not just the 15 working days or 5 working days for priority service. You have to account for the other side of that. So yeah, very, very quickly then, these are the problems we tend to see. Again, someone not reading the requirements. There's nothing we can do about that. The first we hear is that they've been refused, and we say, oh, did something go wrong? And literally they will say, we just didn't read the requirements. So they may have provided lots of financial information, but if they didn't show what's required, it's refused, unfortunately. And also there are applications made too soon. Again, either they don't see that there's a 28-day requirement, or they panic that they're going to be late, so they think it's fine to apply early. And actually there is quite a widespread belief that the 28 days goes on until the Home Office decision maker makes a decision. That's definitely not the case. That's how to get refused. You have to have it for 28 days before you press submit. I don't want to go into international company. We've looked at business, educational loans again, and verification. We've touched on all that already. So, you know, these are rare. I don't want to give the impression these are rare, but these are what to be aware of. Obviously, we want to, you know, we want to make everyone feel like these are rare, but this is, you know, you don't want to fall into these traps, essentially. So I think I'm going to leave timing for, you can really just self-read this. And as I say, the requirements are finances and an offer, but for me, the third requirement is timing. I'm going to let you to look at that, and I've done an example I think is a good one, and it's someone who gets a conditional offer in June, yeah. However, because of some of those pitfalls, they end up having to defer. So they had 4 months, 4 months to get to the UK for their course, and it's fairly easily done. But yeah, unless you think about timing, this is what can happen. You can miss a year. So and you know, no one wants that to happen, especially now it's possible to come in person. Graduate route. The main point is I say student route, it should be an easy visa to obtain. Graduate route is even easier. It's not automatic. There are requirements, but essentially if you complete your course and make the application before your student visa expires, it is almost automatic. It's probably the easiest route to apply for. Students do obviously need to think, they shouldn't just go off and apply, but it is very easy. There's no real documentary requirements. They must be, you know, studying a track record sponsor. So if things change with universities with that, that's obviously a big issue. So successful course completion, you have to apply before your student or Tier 4 visa expires. You must apply in the UK. The university tells the Home Office that you've completed successfully. You don't need to prove that. It's all done electronically. It's really good, I must admit. The Home Office has done that really well. And yeah, as we covered earlier, 2 years permission to remain in the UK, 3 if you've completed a PhD. It's once in a lifetime visa. You can't get it twice, no matter if you do another course afterwards. However, the Home Office intention is that if you want to remain in the UK beyond graduate route, you should be looking at getting a job in that time that meets the skilled work requirements. So that's a more full-time, graduate level salary at least job. So you can do any job whilst doing graduate route. However, if you want to stay after, you should be obtaining a job more formally with the required salary. This is all self-explanatory. This is how to refer. So we advise applicants at the point they have a student number. So conditional offer is fine, of course, because many students have conditional offers, and so we advise prospective students more generally, but we won't go into any main detail until you have applied to the university and have a student number, so we can undertake make records, etc. And just to be aware of that, if you're based in the UK, I don't know if any of you are, but you should be aware that you are you have to be regulated. So if you are UK based, please do have a look at this slide again when you get a chance. So the university we're regulated. Myself and my colleagues are regulated. We're exempt because we work for a university. But if you don't work for a law firm or a university or a public sector immigration advice body, you're not permitted to give immigration advice. You can signpost. So you can signpost students, applicants to our visa pages or the Home Office, but you do need to be careful that you don't go beyond that. Right. Sorry for going so far. Sorry for the timing issues. And finally, it's very easy to contact us. Once you have an offer, as I say, it's you can contact us every day of the year. Sorry for the timing issues. It was
that's really
there's a lot to cover. I mean,
thanks very much for going through all that detail. It is a lot to get through in an hour, so I'm sure everyone's found that really useful. So thanks very much for that. Good. Okay, Greg, shall we leap in then to a few questions that have come in the chat?
Yes.
How many we can get through? Perhaps we'll just sort of run over for 5 or 10 minutes if people are able to.
That's fine.
To hang around. Is that okay with you, Greg?
Please do. Yeah.
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you. So, anyone else who wants to type in questions, please go ahead and do that in the chat. We've had a few coming through that are more to do with specifically applications and entry requirements for the University of Brighton. We'll maybe run through a few of those if we have time, but we'll try and prioritize the kind of visa specific questions. So there's quite a few people here asking if Duolingo is accepted. I think I can say a no to that one. That's not accepted by Brighton. What's the turnaround time for offer letters? Target is 5 days, but I think it often takes 2-3 weeks to get the offer letter at the moment because of the high demand. Do applicants have to provide the source of income of the funds provided? Let's say parents' pay slips, if we are providing the parents' bank account. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a good question. No, absolutely not. So you want to keep the paperwork as limited as possible. So if you're self-funded, you need to just show a bank statement with the funds, ensuring that the funds cover 28-day period. That's how to do it. They don't want salary slips, and that's very much old pre-tier 4 student route stuff where you very much had to show that you could no, so this is intended to be much more this is, it's much meant to be much more easy for the Home Office to see that the funds are there. So
brilliant, thank you, Greg. Okay, and what other questions have we got here? Can the university access, I wonder if you might know this one, Greg, will the 16-year-old students be accepted into the university? Certain requirements around parent and guardian. I'm not sure that's a visa specific question, but is that one?
We have a number of 17-year-old students. I don't think I've ever encountered 16, possibly because they've not done the necessary foundation or A-level equivalent. But yeah, we receive under 18s, and of course they have to provide further evidence, which is covered on our website, on our visa pages. And yes, we make the necessary arrangements for their reception, etc. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. And what's the status at the moment, Greg? We've had a couple of questions here around CAS and pre-CAS interviews. What's the status at Brighton at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, the policy is in the main is not, we don't carry out interviews, so the majority of it's taken, the interviews are required in a small number of certain cases. There's no fixed criteria. It's just if there's a query, essentially if there's queries that come up with the CAS request form. So
yeah, so if you're unsure about issuing a CAS for any variety of reasons,
that's correct. Yeah, I mean, the reason we do it is, it's not to catch anyone out, it's to ensure that their visa application is going to succeed, because as much as the student doesn't want to have a refusal, we don't eat either. So
indeed. And Greg, there's some questions here about MOI as well, medium of instruction. I believe Brighton will accept MOI from some regions, but I'm not sure you're going to have the list off the top of your head, are you?
No, I don't. It does exist, and it's held in admissions. So yeah, it can be provided.
Yeah, so I mean, these kind of questions that are more Brighton specific, as we're going to have a sort of Brighton launch session in a couple of weeks' time. So
Sure. Yeah.
we can run through that kind of stuff then. But confirming that the MOI can be accepted from some regions for Brighton. And in those cases, because Brighton is a highly trusted sponsor, or whatever the new term is for that, Greg.
Yeah, track record. Yeah.
Use the MOI for the visa application, aren't you?
Yes. So if we accept the MOI, then we will say we've assessed your English, which means they don't have to take a CELT and they don't need to provide any documents with the application. So yeah, we obviously try and do our own assessment as much as possible. So
yeah, good stuff. Thank you. And for how long does a student have to live in a third country to be considered as long stay, and therefore be able to apply for the student visa from the third country?
Yeah. Okay. So visit visas, essentially, they vary across countries. So here it's 6 months. Some other countries it's only 3 months. I mean, a good rule of thumb is if you've got a visit visa, then you can't you can't apply. As far as the Home Office is concerned, you're not living in that country. So if you have a different visa, so maybe a study visa, long-term study visa, or sometimes as a family visa, then that will be acceptable because you're not visiting. So essentially, if you're not visiting the country, you can apply there.
Yeah. So if you're studying there, working there, living with family there,
and that's the same for dual nationals. Of course, some students have 2 nationalities. They're permitted to apply in either because they have that nationality.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for clarifying that, Greg. Okay, and deposit. I mean, there's a question here. Is there any deposit required before interview? We sort of discussed the interview thing already, but I think it's worth saying that the deposit is required before the CAS. That's the key point, isn't it, Greg?
Yeah, so the deadline, you don't need to pay the deposit until the CAS questionnaire has been submitted, so you have an unconditional firm offer. That would be the time to pay it, really, once you are offered an unconditional offer, because then once the CAS checks are done, the CAS can be issued. So that would save time, especially if you can't pay the deposit by card, for example.
So to clarify that then, Greg, I mean, the typical process is a student gets a conditional offer.
Yeah.
Because most students haven't met all the requirements at the time they apply. Then they submit their English language certificate or whatever it was.
Yes.
Everything that's required to meet the conditions in the offer. Then they get their unconditional offer.
Yeah.
At the time when they get their unconditional offer, are they also then automatically provided with the CAS questionnaire?
That's right. Yeah, it appears in applicant in the portal. So
yeah, so we can access that via the portal as the agent, and the questionnaire is completed and the deposit is paid. Did you say before or after completing the questionnaire?
Well, I'd say to do it at the same time.
Same time, yeah.
Because then, sometimes it only takes a couple of days to do the checks for the CAS. So you don't want to be waiting for the CAS if you then have to pay the deposit by bank transfer or whatever. So, I would say pay it once you receive the unconditional offer, really.
Yeah. Good. Okay, thank you. Is people asking if they'll get a copy of the presentation, which we will circulate. We've also made a recording of the session that we'll be able to circulate as well. What else have we got here? A lot of these we're going to cut. So a lot about entry requirements for Brighton, which we're going to come back to in the Brighton session in a couple of weeks' time. So here's one about the graduate route visa, Greg. Even if the master program is for 1 year, so the vast majority of masters in the UK are for 1 year, is it correct that the graduate route visa will still be for 2 years? And that's a yes, isn't it, Greg?
That's correct. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Does a 17-year-old student have to apply does their sort of application have to be supported somehow by their parents? Do you know the answer to that?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. It does. Yes,
Yeah.
they have to. So if they're providing their bank statements, they have to provide a letter of consent for that, like any student aged 18 or over. But they also have to provide a separate letter, providing their consent to the student travelling to the UK, and that they, are making arrangements for their living and accommodation.
Okay, thanks, Greg. What about students wanting to change university? So they've enrolled, let's say in this case at Brighton.
Mm-hmm.
From a visa perspective, how difficult is it? It's not something they certainly shouldn't enter into it lightly, I think. It's
not at all easy anymore, in fact. So unfortunately, if you start at one university and you want to study at another, without first completing your course, in most cases you do need to leave and apply for a new visa. You need to actually return to your country of residence and apply for a fresh visa. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Yes, I mean, because in the UK, a student is sponsored by a university for their visa.
Correct.
Really tied to that university.
Yeah. So you would have to leave and apply for a new visa. That's correct.
Yeah. If financial documents are in the name of a spouse, is that acceptable?
You can be, yeah, if they're coming with.
Okay, great.
So there's it's provisional. So I would have to, that would be something to advise individually.
Right, okay.
Because it can get complicated. So, depends if they're coming together or not.
And if they're not coming together, it's not acceptable?
No.
Right, okay. Thank you. All right, another question then here from Melissa. This is a good question. If the student visa application is refused, is there any appeal process?
Well, it's not a formal appeal process, as in one that goes before the appellate authorities. That's pre-tier 4 student route. There's a review. It's called an administrative review, okay. Which is very useful. It does work if there's been a very blatant error made by the Home Office. It's very useful. It can be useful if there's been what we think has been an incorrect interpretation of students' intentions, for example. So yeah, we have quite a lot of success with those.
Okay, but it has to be a legitimate reason for appeal. There has to be a clear.
Oh yes, yeah. So if it's reasonably likely that the decision was correct, you're not going to succeed. So with the admin review, it may be that you need to reapply. So I think a good example is if you applied and you only had the money for 14 days and there's no other evidence of having the money, then you're not going to win an admin review. You have to apply again once you've had the money for 28 days.
Yeah, good example. Yeah. Okay, and that sort of appeal process doesn't make a difference whether you're in the UK or you're overseas.
No, it's same. Obviously, the advantage of being in the UK is if you applied in time, then you can stay here until that's decided.
Yeah. Okay.
Whereas, very often if you have to go to an admin review and you applied probably July, August, you're probably going to run out of time.
Too late. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's best to get it right the first time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. If the student has a previous visa refusal in another category, could that affect the outcome of their student visa application?
No, it's not. No, not necessarily. There's no. It doesn't automatically result in a refusal. Certainly not. No, it needs to be addressed if it wasn't appealed or if there was no admin review. But the mechanism we have is when you request when you fill in the CAS form and we see that, then the process is that we then advise them. We'll get in touch. So because we need to advise them on, you know, what happened, and then how best to prepare for the student application. So yeah, no, it doesn't mean that we won't give a CAS, and it doesn't mean that the student visa will be refused.
No. Okay, great. Thanks, Greg. Okay, probably the last question here. Can a student change from one course to another but within the same university?
Yeah, so I presume that you mean without having to leave and get a new visa.
Yeah,
yeah, in certain circumstances, it's possible. The rule is I think the best example is if you do year one of an undergrad and you're successful, but then you say, actually, this isn't the right course for me, and you find another course to transfer to, if you can go into year two of that course, i.e. you can complete that course with your existing 3-year visa,
right,
that's fine. Unfortunately, if you do year one and then think this is not for me, find another course and they say, I'm afraid you're going to have to start at the beginning, unfortunately that involves leaving and applying for a new visa. So okay. Yeah, if you can do a very straightforward transfer within the same progress points, that's not a problem.
Yeah, so if you're transferring from kind of one
exactly, yeah, exactly,
probably okay, but to go from business into medicine,
exactly, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, thank you, Greg. Well, I think we've got through the main questions there. To those that have asked questions around sort of entry requirements and scholarships for Brighton and all that stuff, we'll be covering that in the launch session we'll be having with Brighton towards the end of this month, and I hope to be able to confirm a time and circulate an invitation for that one soon. But we've received a huge amount of useful information there from Greg, so big thanks to you, Greg, and good to see you again.
No problem.
And yeah, for everyone, I've also put in the chat and I'll put it again now. You can go up to the Accelerate platform and find Brighton's profile there, have a look at the courses that are available to apply for. There's a good deal of information there around deposits and entry requirements there as well. But we'll be running through all of that in detail next time at the end of this month. But for now, again, a big thanks to Greg, big thanks to everyone for all the great questions we had there to cover off in the chat, and look forward to seeing you all again next time. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you.